Well, hello again, brothers and sisters. It's good to be with you and grateful for the opportunity to present the scriptures to you. It always doesn't quite feel like the act of preaching, although it is in the best sense of the word preaching. But without an audience before you, there is something certainly that gets lost when you are a preacher. But nevertheless, grateful for the opportunity to be with you this way. So let me take a few minutes before we start to update you on what I've been able to find out and determine about the reopening of churches. So in San Joaquin County, the Board of Supervisors filed a petition uh, early last week asking the governor to allow the county to go into phase two of, quote, the reopening. So that request was granted. However, the phase two reopening does not include the reopening of houses of worship. It is not included in that directive, and I've read that from the San Joaquin County website. You also probably know that there is an increased demand across states and across the nation as a whole that it is time that states permit and allow houses of worship to reopen. Now, Governor Newsom has announced that on Monday, I believe it's Monday, even though it's a holiday, that on Monday he would be announcing the guidelines for churches to that they need to follow. I don't know if it's going to be an actual declaration that churches can reopen, but we won't know anything further until that time. The only thing I'm requesting that we do is that we not jump into uh, running into this thing, that we make sure that we're behaving as much as we can be in obedience to our governing authorities, which is part of our Christian obligation, and also to behave in a wise and prudent manner. I realize that some of us may feel frustrated and even possibly angry about all that we've had to put up with and would like to see things get back to normal as soon as possible. But we need to pause, and we need to be sure that we're behaving in a wise and prudent manner. The most important thing that for me is to make sure that when the time comes that we do in some way reopen, that every one of our members are informed, that they have facts and information, and that we all understand that no matter what we try to do, there is always going to be some measure of a measured risk involved. And there are measured risks in everything we do in life, and this particular circumstance is no different. So let's hope and pray that things will move quickly and enable us to meet together in a safe and reasonably responsible manner. All right. So I want to begin by reading our text, which is going to be from Philippians chapter 4 and beginning in verse 10. And here the Apostle Paul writes, I greatly rejoice in the Lord that at last you have renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you have been concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. So I want to begin with the observation that in 2006 there was a massively huge best-selling book that was called The Secret. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies. There's several editions of it out. There's some kind of a movie based on the book. and it was a huge bestseller. I think it made the circuit around talk shows and everything else. And of course, when you get down to the bottom line about this book, the book called The Secret was nothing more than popularized New Age philosophy and psychology. Um, it was suggesting that if you follow the principles of this book, it would offer to you what thousands and thousands of books offer you every year, and that is a fulfilling, transformative, incredibly successful life is available to anyone who wants it. You just have to understand what the secret is. So that was the pitch, if you will. That was the way that they sold the book, was that humanity has been looking for the secret, the one simple thing that if we could just find out what that one simple thing is and we would just put it into practice, then all that we want out of life would come to pass. Well, what this book was offering was in fact nothing new at all. It was old age philosophy, old age psychology, and it's basically based on the premise that's probably going to sound rather foolish to you, but the idea behind the book was that by the power of your thinking, by the power of your beliefs, and what you hold in your mind to be the truth about things, you are able to bring those thoughts into reality. You can attract and make the world and your circumstances favorable to you by the power of your thoughts. And that, in a nutshell, is what the book was claiming. Now, what's interesting is that this quest for some secret, for some insight, for some disclosure of something that will finally give us the answer and help us to overcome all of our unhappiness and all of our pain, all of our misery and all of our discontent has been going on for thousands and thousands of years, as long as human beings have been alive. We all, in a sense, are looking for that one thing. We don't know what it is, but there's that one thing that we think has got to be out there, that if we could just find it, it would solve and remedy and, in principle, cure all of our ills and make us completely fulfilled and satisfied. Well, the Apostle Paul, in the text that we just read, was somebody who knew the secret. And I don't mean that he was the first one who came up with the idea that's in the book, The Secret. Paul, however, understood that there is a secret to life. There is something that is so profoundly significant and important, and yet so few people are able to recognize and comprehend it. So just remember, remind you again, go back to the text here. Look at what it says here. I have learned the secret. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. Now, we're going to see what that really translates into is just this. I have learned the secret to a joyful, purposeful, satisfactory, fulfilling life in every possible way. That's really what Paul's saying when we unpack the meaning of what it means to be content. But Paul says, I've learned the secret. And when he uses that phrase, I've learned the secret, what he's telling us is people are looking and looking and looking for something that to them up to this point has been hidden from their understanding. That they're so, I think what he's saying is we're too blind to see and recognize. And Paul says, I've learned what that secret is. And that's what we're going to begin to consider today. So, in light of the importance of this topic, and I want to do justice to what the Apostle Paul is saying here, we're going to break this into two sermons or two lessons. So we'll do today's sermon. We were going to be focusing primarily on the meaning of contentment. What does it mean to be content, and what does the scripture have to tell us about the secret of contentment? And then the next lesson, and this is going to be the midweek lesson. So this won't be for next Sunday. This will be the midweek lesson, which is always up on Thursday morning. So on Thursday morning, we'll have part 2. And in that sermon, we're going to focus on the secret that is revealed. And that is here in verse 13. The secret to being content in every situation is, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. So we'll devote an entire lesson to that final verse and understand what is involved in receiving the strength that comes from Christ. So I just want to begin or just move on to what to me is the utterly astonishing claim that the Apostle Paul is making in this text. This is just utterly amazing what he is claiming he has insight into. And it's an insight that in so many ways is so fundamentally simple. And yet it is an insight that when it is offered, most people go, yeah, okay, all right, I know, you're supposed to be content and all these other kinds of things. And it just flies right over our heads, and we don't really read it as being revolutionary and transformative in every way. We just read it as another piece of the Bible that goes in one ear and out the other, and doesn't really, in the end, translate into our life at all. It's kind of like this platitude that the Bible gives us that sounds neat and sounds profound and significant, and we know we're supposed to say it, and we're not supposed to affirm it, but we don't really believe it, and we don't know how to live it out. So just notice again, just some of the fundamental affirmations in this statement. He says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Okay? I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. This is astonishing. This is an absolute 100% guarantee, okay? This is something that's foolproof. These are the kinds of things that advertisers 100% guarantee. It's absolutely foolproof. You won't believe the results you're going to find from this. No matter what, you'll be satisfied, right? That's a big pitch that all kinds of advertisers throw at us to get us to buy products. So what we have going on here is an astonishing claim that a man is telling you, no matter what your circumstances are. Now, that doesn't leave room for any wiggle room out of that. Well, what if you're in prison what if you're unjustly thrown in prison and facing a death penalty? Well, guess what? That's a whatever circumstance. It doesn't make any difference what you want to put before him. He's banking everything on this one fundamental secret of contentment. And he's telling us that no matter what your circumstances are, this is how contentment is to be found. So then in verse 12, he says, I know what it is to be in need. So he's been on the low end of the spectrum, right? And Paul knows a lot about what it means to be in need. I know what it is to be in need, but he says, I know what it is to have plenty. So he's been through both polar extremes, right? I've been to the place where I've had it all, and I've been to the place where I've had nothing. And anywhere along that scale, whether I have, no matter what it's been, he then moves in to say, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. This again is another 100% foolproof, money-back guarantee kind of a statement. In any and every situation. So what we can say is this, just simply plug in whatever your situation is right now that you're in as you're listening to this sermon. Plug it in. Here's my situation. And some of us may have a situation that we find very discouraging and difficult and unfair, and a circumstance that's generating within us a great deal of unhappiness and dissatisfaction with ourselves and with our lives as a whole. And you can plug in that situation that you're in right now. And the Apostle Paul wants you to hear him say, I've learned the secret of being content. And I mean being content even in your circumstance that you are in. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And here, of course, is the secret to all things, which we will explore in more depth next week, because we first of all need to understand the secret of contentment itself and what that means. So let's then move in to think a little bit about the meaning. Number 5, the meaning of contentment. I have learned to be content in whatever situation I'm in. All right, well, contentment in the most general way, when you're content, you are genuinely satisfied, you're undisturbed, and you're at peace within yourself. So contentment has no regard for what the circumstances may or may not be. Contentment is about your inner state of being. And the best way to describe it is genuine satisfaction. Being undisturbed in your soul and your spirit. And being at peace within yourself. So I want to suggest to you that when we look at how the word contentment was used by the Greeks and how we understand and address our desires and our needs and our wants and our emotions, it's extremely hard for us to find a place of contentment. And so let's try to see what we can to unearth a little bit about what's going on and why contentment is so important to us and why contentment is so elusive to us. One of the fundamental challenges in being content is that we are beset with all kinds of desires. We are beset with desires and emotions and feelings within ourselves. And we have desires that clamor for attention. So you have a desire for food. If you go out without food, your body is going to give you signals and signs, and your stomach will growl, your mouth will grow dry, like mine does when I talk too much when I preach and I get a drink of water. And when you're in that state where your body is telling you, I need food and drink, it's hard to be content and at peace because those desires are demanding you, and they're insisting upon you that you do something about them. And so you can't be content when you're in a situation like that. We have all kinds of emotions that work through our inside of our souls that can leave us worried and afraid, leave us sad, leave us concerned, leave us dissatisfied. And when you have those emotions rolling around inside of you, you're disturbed. You're not balanced out. You're upset. Now, when we say you're upset, that means that something is supposed to be, like this, and if it's upset, that means it's been turned upside down. The emotions upset you. So that's part of what contentment's about. And humanity has been on a quest to try to find a way to let all of these desires and yearnings of our body and our soul and our life, to find a way for them to be tamed and managed and brought under control so that we're not disturbed and upset by them one way or the other. So let me suggest that one of the things that's involved in contentment is learning what is too little, what is too much, what I don't need, and what I do need. If you want to understand something, the idea of contentment, think of Goldilocks and the three bears, right? Too hard, too soft, just right. Too hot, too cold, just right. Learning to be content means to finding the just right place within our soul. And we are too preoccupied with the too much here or the too little here. I want this and I don't have it, or I'm indulging so much in something over here that it's clamoring for me to get more and more and more. So let me go to my trusty virtual whiteboard and illustrate this basic idea, one of the things that's involved in contentment. So let me get that out of here. So here I've tried to show here, right here in the middle is where contentment is found. Whoops. Well, that didn't turn out the way I wanted to. What the heck? Okay. Still having trouble figuring all this stuff out, so we'll avoid writing on it. So for now, just notice that I just tried to show here the idea of extremes and the place in the middle. In the middle, we're going to answer this question is what I genuinely need. The key to contentment is understanding what you need, not what you want. And most of our discontentment is confusing needs with wants. But let this box represent the contentment square, the place where I have just what I need. And you go over to the left, when you have just what you need, that means you don't have too little of it or none of it. And you move to the right, I don't have too much of it. And much of our discontentment is having too much or having too little, or thinking that I have too little, when in fact I have just what I need. So again, with Goldilocks, not too cold, not too hot, but just right, just where it needs to be. And that's one of the foundational truths that's involved in being content. And so we live our lives too much out on the edges over here, on the too little end or on the too much end. And because of that, we miss what is actually needed. What is needed? What is really the thing that is needed is what we usually have missed completely, and it's where almost all of our problems with discontentment comes from. So, let's go back to our outline and ask this question. So what is needed? What is needed? And here, according to the Apostle Paul, he identifies what the problem is. The problem is that we base our contentment on favorable circumstances. Say that again. We base our contentment on favorable circumstances. Or you really could almost say just the whole circumstances of your life. To the extent that the circumstances work as I believe they should, and I get what I want, and things work in the way that I want them to be, to that measure, I might have some type of contentment. The problem is that reality doesn't work this way. The outside world is not ordained to satisfy you and what you think you need and what you have to be fulfilled. The world does not operate this way. So remember Paul, when he's talking about contentment, this thing keeps coming up like that. When he's talking about contentment, do you notice how often he talked about circumstances? Did you notice that? So let's go back here. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Paul is saying that why we're not content is because everything is wrapped up in the ever-changing, unpredictable, and uncontrollable circumstances of our lives. And let this current COVID issue be a perfect example of that. You can't control that. Okay? I have known what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, circumstance, whether well-fed or hungry, circumstance, whether living in plenty or in want, circumstance. Paul says the key, the secret is, first of all, recognizing what? Let's go back over here. The secret, first element of the secret is our contentment has nothing to do with favorable circumstances. This is it. Now there's another side to the coin, which is that through Christ I can find all that I need. Okay. But the secret is our contentment has nothing to do with favorable circumstances. I'm just going to be very bold and very blunt and say that most people, whether they're Christians or not, don't believe that. How's that? I am saying that most people, whether they're in the church, whether they call themselves Christians or not, don't believe that statement. They do not live their lives believing that that statement expresses the truth about the world we live in. My contentment has nothing to do with favorable circumstances. I realize that some of us can say it and talk about it, but we don't believe it. We just don't believe it. We are too wrapped up in a vision of our lives and our world, and yes, I'm one of them. Very shamefully and painfully aware of this truth. As part of the double-edged sword of preaching is that you, if you're trying to be as fair as you can be with Scripture, you're not the only one who gets rebuked. It's not just the audience, but the preacher. He gets the rebuking just as well as everybody else does. And I'm being rebuked in that statement. Paul says my contentment has nothing to do with my circumstances. And we just look at, like Paul and Silas in the Philippian jail singing and praising God. And we say, but they were like super Christians. I mean, they were cut from a different cloth. I mean, real people can't be like that. I mean, there's no way that people can be like that. I mean, there's just a handful of people that have what it takes to do that. And that's where we have so missed the point. It's amazing how much we tie our contentment, our satisfaction, our happiness, our well-being to our circumstances. I'm going to be going a little bit. I took about 3 or 4 minutes to explain some of those introductory matters about the COVID issue, so I'm going to be going over a little bit than normal. But let me share an illustration. I believe I've shared it before. There was a study done, it was at least 10, 15 years ago, among college young men and young women who were attending college. And here was the question that they were put for. There was a professor who was teaching a certain kind of class on, I think it was on happiness or satisfaction or meaning in life. And here was the proposal. You have two options. You can either be happy and poor, or you can be rich and unhappy. Of those two situations, which one would you pick? So that's basically your lot for the rest of your life. You can be poor but happy, and you can be rich and unhappy. And to my dismay, that I cannot comprehend, maybe because I'm older now, most of those students, it was a significant number of the students, an overwhelming majority, said they would rather be unhappy and rich. Now, I believe the reason why that answer was given is because they still believe that happiness is tied to what? It's tied to favorable circumstances. Oh, they probably had a problem with the question because they didn't think it was possible to be rich and to be unhappy that way. That they would be an exception. Somehow, in some way, they could at least have all that wealth and they'd find a way to find happiness and get themselves out of their unhappiness because of their wealth. This goes to show how materialistic and earthly and godless we are in our mentality, that we can't even think it's possible to be happy and to not have any wealth. How can you be happy and be, quote, poor? Now, that doesn't mean that we would yearn and want poverty. No human being wants poverty. Jesus and the early church had profound care and concern for those who were poor. That's not my point. My point is that we are wrapped up in a mentality, particularly in American culture and American society, all the ways that we define happiness and success and fulfillment and meaning and satisfaction and purpose is all tied to life going your way and the circumstances of life shaping in your direction. You see, back up here when I introduced this book called The Secret, the whole premise of this book, The Secret, was just that somehow in some way you can make the world become what you want it to be. Okay? The whole point of The Secret is to, by your thoughts, you can somehow manipulate the world around you, your circumstances, and get them to be conformed to what your thinking is all about and get what you want out of it. So when a preacher gets up on a Sunday morning and says, brothers and sisters in Christ, our contentment has nothing to do with favorable circumstances, deep down inside, we don't really believe that. We don't really believe that. And we have to be convicted about that. And we have to acknowledge that and recognize how blinding our prosperity and our comforts and our conveniences can be to any one of us. And not a single one of us is immune to this at all. So, let me share with you a passage that I think is really a second text by Paul that brings another dimension to understanding. And here Paul just gets to a point where I remember when I first read this verse a long time ago and thinking to myself, he can't really mean that, does he? And I'm afraid he does mean what he says. So let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 6. And let me see how my time is getting.